Before you go any further, gently bring your attention here. Not to rush, not to analyze, just to arrive fully in this moment. Let your breathing slow down a little. Let your body loosen where it's been holding tension. If it feels natural, place your hand over your chest and allow yourself to settle into a quieter state of awareness. Because what you are about to hear is not something ordinary that simply passes through your attention and disappears. There is a deeper layer to it. Something subtle, something personal, something that may feel strangely recognizable even if you cannot immediately explain why. And if this message has reached you today, don't be too quick to dismiss that fact. There are moments in life when certain ideas arrive exactly when we are in a position to truly understand them. Not earlier than we should, not later than we need, but at a very specific point where awareness begins to open. There is something here worth your attention. Somewhere, someone has been thinking about you more than you realize, not in passing, not occasionally, but in a steady, quiet, and ongoing way that they rarely express out loud, even when life made it look like they had moved on, even when they acted distant or emotionally occupied with other things, even when circumstances pulled them in different directions. You never fully left their inner world. Your presence stayed with them. Your memory remained embedded in their thoughts in ways they did not always acknowledge, even to themselves. And recently, something within them has begun to shift. Not in a loud or dramatic way, not in a sudden emotional explosion that others can easily notice, but in something quieter, more internal, more personal. The kind of change that starts beneath awareness long before it becomes visible in behavior. Whether you call it timing, destiny, coincidence, or simply the natural unfolding of human emotion, something is moving now. And because of that movement, they are slowly approaching a realization they have been avoiding for quite some time. And when that realization finally reaches the surface, it may change the direction of everything you thought you understood. Take another breath and allow that idea to settle instead of resisting it, because this moment you are in right now did not land in your awareness randomly. Sometimes we encounter words that feel strangely aligned with something we have been carrying internally for a long time. Not because the world is sending signals, but because our attention finally becomes sensitive enough to notice what was already there. And perhaps that is what is happening for you now. Think about someone who once stepped back, someone who became quieter over time, someone who slowly created distance without fully explaining what was happening inside them. On the surface, they may have appeared fine. They may have acted like it didn't matter anymore. They may have even convinced others, and at times themselves, that they had fully detached from what once existed between you. But underneath that surface, a different process has been unfolding. Recently, something in them changed direction, not dramatically, not in a way that can be easily explained to others, but in a deeply internal way. The kind of shift that begins in silence and grows in reflection. And because of that inner shift, they are now moving closer to something they can no longer fully suppress. Not casual conversation, not temporary curiosity, not simple nostalgia, but something deeper that has been sitting inside them for a long time. A feeling, a recognition, a truth they carried longer than they admitted. And eventually, carrying it alone became too heavy to continue the same way. So when they eventually reach out, their words may feel sudden to you. But for them, those words will have been forming slowly, over time, across many quiet moments. Now, there is a reason this pattern happens in human connection. Some bonds do not behave like ordinary experiences. They don't simply disappear because time passes. They don't dissolve just because communication stops. And they don't always fade just because life moves forward. Certain people leave impressions that linger far deeper than expected. Certain connections shape the emotional landscape of a person in ways that only become clear much later. And you may have already experienced signs of this yourself. Moments when this person suddenly appeared in your thoughts without warning. Times when your mind drifted to them even while you were focused on something completely unrelated. A song, a place, a sound, or a passing situation that unexpectedly pulled their memory forward. Maybe even dreams that felt unusually real, or emotions that surfaced without a clear reason when you woke up. These experiences often leave people questioning why someone still takes up space in their mind long after everything seemed to end. And the answer is not always complicated. Sometimes it simply means the connection left a deeper imprint than expected, one that does not erase easily with time. And while you were experiencing your own moments of remembering, something similar was unfolding within them as well. They tried to move forward. They stayed occupied. They filled their days with responsibilities, distractions, conversations, and routines. They told themselves they were fine. They told themselves it was in the past. They told themselves it no longer mattered. And sometimes they almost believed it. But silence has a way of revealing what distraction hides. When the noise of the day fades, when there is no audience, no pressure, no activity to stay busy with, the mind begins to return to what was never fully resolved. And in those quieter moments, your presence returned again and again. Not because they forced it, not because they wanted it, but because something inside them had not fully processed the meaning of what you represented in their life. And over time, that repetition changed them. It pushed them toward questions they could no longer avoid. Why does this still feel unfinished? Why does this memory still carry weight? Why hasn't anything replaced it? Why does this person still feel present within me? These are not easy questions because answering them honestly requires emotional responsibility. It requires looking beyond excuses. It requires acknowledging feelings that were once buried or ignored. From the outside, they may seem composed, stable, even unaffected. But internally, there has been an ongoing conflict, a quiet struggle between what they tried to convince themselves of and what they genuinely felt. And slowly, the truth began to take more space. They started revisiting moments they once pushed aside, conversations they underestimated, the feeling of being understood by you in ways they did not fully appreciate at the time. Even the simplest memories began to carry meaning they had overlooked before. And with each reflection, one realization kept returning with more clarity, that your presence in their life mattered far more than they ever openly acknowledged to others and even to themselves. And once that realization formed, it changed everything inside them. Yet even after reaching that point, uncertainty remains. They don't know how you will respond now. They don't know if time has created distance that cannot be bridged. They don't know if your life has already moved into a direction where they no longer belong. They don't know if reaching out will rebuild something or simply confirm that the chapter has ended. But one thing is certain for them now. Staying silent is no longer something they feel they can continue doing. There are forms of regret that time does not dissolve. People often assume that distance eventually softens everything, that enough days, enough months, enough years will blur what once felt important. And sometimes that belief holds true. Life moves forward, emotions settle, and what once felt intense begins to fade into memory. But there are other times when it doesn't work that way. There are regrets that remain quietly embedded in a person's inner world, not loud enough to control their daily life, but never quiet enough to fully disappear either. They show up in still moments, in reflective thoughts, in unexpected memories. They surface when something reminds them of what once had meaning. They return during milestones, during quiet nights, during moments when distraction is no longer strong enough to hold them back. And the reason they stay is simple. Something real happened, something meaningful existed, but it was never fully expressed, never fully processed, never fully resolved. And anything left unfinished has a way of lingering in the background of the mind, asking to be completed. Over time, carrying that unfinished emotional weight becomes tiring. Not always obvious at first, but slowly it builds. It sits beneath everything else they try to focus on, until eventually they reach a point where continuing in silence feels heavier than facing the truth. And that is what brought them here. Not certainty, not guarantees, not a perfect understanding of how things will unfold, but a shift in priority where honesty finally began to outweigh avoidance. Pause for a moment and consider what that actually represents. Choosing to reach out after a long silence is not simple. It is not casual. It is not something done without internal resistance. It requires confronting discomfort, stepping into vulnerability, and accepting the possibility of rejection. For many people, that becomes one of the most difficult emotional decisions they ever make, and yet they are doing it anyway, because something inside them has changed. This change is not about becoming a different person overnight. It is about reaching a level of awareness that was not accessible before, a recognition of things that were once denied, minimized, or pushed aside, a willingness to stop defending old narratives and start seeing things more honestly. There was a version of them that could not have done this. That earlier version avoided difficult conversations. That version rationalized their silence. That version misunderstood what they were feeling or did not know how to express it. That version chose distance because it felt safer than confrontation. But that version is not the one acting now. Something in them has matured through experience, reflection, and consequence. And that matters, because it takes humility to reach a point where someone can finally acknowledge their own emotional responsibility. It requires letting go of pride. It requires releasing the need to justify every past decision. It requires facing uncomfortable truths without immediately escaping into excuses. When someone reaches that level of honesty with themselves, what they say begins to carry a different kind of weight, not because the words themselves are powerful, but because of the inner process that had to happen before those words could even exist. Still, this moment is not only about them. Your presence in this dynamic matters just as much, because when someone returns with vulnerability and truth, it naturally awakens something within you as well. Hope begins to rise. That is human. That is understandable. Hope looks for meaning. It searches for reassurance. It wants clarity. It wants confirmation that what was felt was real, that the connection mattered, that something meaningful still exists beneath the distance. Hope wants restoration. And maybe there is something here that can be rebuilt. Maybe this moment opens a door that leads somewhere neither of you expected. Maybe it creates space for understanding that was missing before. Maybe it allows something new to emerge from what was once unresolved. But hope alone is not enough to guide you. Because hope without awareness can blur perception. It can make the mind rush ahead of reality. It can cause people to see what they want instead of what is actually present. It can make silence feel like certainty and emotion feel like proof. Awareness is different. Awareness allows you to stay grounded while still being open. It lets you listen without losing yourself in interpretation. It helps you notice not just what is being said, but how it is being said. It allows you to observe responsibility instead of just hearing emotion. It helps you distinguish between sincere accountability and temporary emotional expression. Because words, on their own, are never the full story. Anyone can explain what they understand now. Anyone can express regret. Anyone can describe growth during a moment of emotional clarity. But the real truth of those words is revealed only over time. What changes afterward? Do actions align with what was expressed? Does behavior shift once emotions settle? Does consistency appear when the intensity of the moment fades? Do they show up differently not just in speech, but in practice, in effort, in presence? That is where truth becomes visible, and your ability to recognize that truth is not accidental. You are not the same person you were before this experience. What happened between you left an imprint on your emotional awareness. The distance, the questions, the uncertainty, the reflection, all of it shaped you. You have sat with feelings that were difficult to understand. You have lived through not having answers. You have learned how to function in the absence of closure. And through that process, something within you strengthened. You began to see more clearly what you need, what you value, and what you can no longer overlook. Growth is not always comfortable, but it is clarifying. It removes illusions. It sharpens perception. It forces emotional honesty. And because of that, this moment carries a different energy than the past. You are not entering it from confusion alone. You are not standing in the same emotional position you once were. You are approaching it with memory, with experience, with understanding of what it cost you and what it taught you. You know what it felt like to be connected. You know what it felt like to lose that connection. You know what it felt like to sit with unanswered questions, and you know what it took to rebuild your sense of stability after that. That awareness remains yours. Their return does not erase it. It does not undo your growth. It does not reset your emotional journey. Instead, it simply becomes another moment to understand yourself more clearly. And that is why this situation now belongs to both of you in different ways. They arrive with something they need to express. You arrive with something you need to evaluate. Not from defensiveness, not from resentment, but from clarity. Clarity about who you are now. Clarity about what you will accept. Clarity about what aligns with your emotional reality today. That is a different kind of strength, not a reaction, not a defense, not a closure driven by emotion alone, but a steady presence within yourself while facing something meaningful. And in moments like this, there may be a brief silence that feels different from the rest, a pause where words stop, but awareness becomes sharper, a space where everything slows just enough for you to notice what is actually present beneath interpretation, before the mind begins to analyze, before emotion takes over the narrative, before assumptions form about what this moment should mean. There is simply recognition, just reality as it is. And that is the point where clarity lives. Because in that stillness, you are not guided by fear or hope or memory alone. You are guided by awareness shaped by everything that brought you here. And that awareness will quietly reveal whether what stands in front of you now is aligned with the path you have become. Whatever answer finally emerges from this moment, you are capable of holding it. That is something people often overlook when emotions are involved. They become so focused on outcomes that they forget their own ability to move through them. They start asking whether things will come back together, whether reconciliation is possible, whether the future can be restored to something familiar. But those are not the only questions that matter. A deeper question exists underneath all of that. How do you choose to be present within what unfolds? Because that is the one part of this moment that truly belongs to you. For a long time, there may have been unanswered questions lingering in the background of your mind. Questions about what this connection truly meant. Questions about whether the depth you felt was ever matched. Questions about whether they ever fully understood the significance of what existed between you. Questions about whether your effort, your presence, your emotional investment was truly seen. These kinds of questions are common after meaningful connections shift or break. Not because people are seeking validation in a shallow sense, but because they are trying to understand reality. They want to know if what they felt was real or if it existed only in their interpretation. And this moment brings something important, not speculation, not imagination, not hope built on uncertainty, but something grounded. Someone is standing here choosing to speak, choosing honesty instead of avoidance, choosing vulnerability instead of distance, choosing to acknowledge things that were once left unspoken. That choice alone carries meaning. Because people do not step into vulnerability without something real pushing them toward it. They do not confront discomfort, risk emotional exposure, or reopen old silence without something within them shifting first. And while none of that automatically guarantees what comes next, it does reveal something essential. Your experience was not imaginary. The connection was not meaningless. What you felt was not something you created alone. Many people struggle for years after emotional disappointment because they begin to question themselves. They start wondering if they cared too much, if they misread things, if their openness was the mistake, if their emotional honesty was the problem. But that is rarely the truth. Your capacity to feel deeply was never the issue. Your willingness to invest was never the flaw. Your ability to care was never what went wrong. Those are not weaknesses. Those are forms of depth that require the right environment to be received properly. Because connection is not sustained by feeling alone. It requires awareness on both sides. It requires emotional readiness. It requires responsibility. It requires two people meeting in a similar space of understanding. When that alignment is missing, even something genuine can struggle to hold its shape. And when things fall apart despite sincerity, the mind tries to protect itself by rewriting the story. It begins suggesting alternatives that feel safer. That maybe you cared too much. Maybe you should have held back. Maybe you should have protected yourself more. At first, That kind of thinking feels like control. It feels like prevention. It feels like wisdom. But over time, it quietly reshapes how you see yourself. Because if caring deeply becomes the problem, then you begin to suppress the very parts of yourself that make connection meaningful in the first place. You start limiting your openness. You start questioning your emotional instinct. You start treating depth like something dangerous instead of something valuable. And slowly, something essential gets dimmed. The truth is not that you cared too much. The truth is that your care met something that was not fully able to meet it back. That distinction changes everything, because it moves responsibility away from your identity and back into the reality of compatibility, timing, readiness, and emotional capacity. Think of it like this: a seed does not fail because it is wrong. It fails when the environment cannot support its growth. Soil, timing, conditions, and care all matter. Without them, even something alive and real cannot fully develop. Relationships work in the same way. Your ability to love was never the problem. The question was whether the connection had what it needed to sustain that love in return. When you begin to understand this, something inside you becomes lighter. You stop rewriting your past in a way that diminishes your value. You stop blaming your depth for outcomes that were never solely yours to control, and you begin to see the situation with more honesty and less distortion. You also begin to recognize something important about human difference. Sometimes two people do not fail because nothing was there. They struggle because they were not in the same emotional place at the same time. One person may have been more aware, more ready, more capable of understanding the significance of the bond, while the other may have still been learning, still processing, still trying to understand themselves and what they were feeling. That imbalance creates confusion. It creates misinterpretation. It creates moments where one person is trying to build while the other is still deciding whether building is even happening. And in that gap, even real connection can become unstable. Not because it lacked meaning, but because it lacked alignment. That distinction matters deeply, because it allows you to look back without turning your own heart into the problem. Instead, you begin to see what the experience actually revealed. It showed you your capacity for depth. It showed you your ability to be emotionally present. It showed you how naturally you can connect when something feels meaningful. It showed you what it feels like to open fully instead of holding back. And those insights are not losses. They are awareness. They become reference points for how you move forward. Not as emotional caution that shuts you down, but as understanding that guides you. Because the goal is never to become less open. The goal is to become more discerning about where your openness is directed. Discernment changes everything. It allows you to stay open without becoming unprotected. It allows you to care without losing yourself. It allows you to hope without disconnecting from reality. It allows you to recognize sooner when effort is not mutual. It allows you to notice when clarity is missing. It allows you to step back without emotional collapse when something consistently does not align, not out of fear, but out of awareness. And now, as this moment approaches its turning point, you are not standing in the same emotional position you once were. You are not arriving as someone waiting to be defined by someone else's response. You are arriving as someone who has already been shaped by experience, someone who understands what it means to feel deeply, someone who understands what it means to lose clarity, someone who understands what it means to rebuild. And that changes the entire dynamic, because you are no longer searching for proof of your worth. You are no longer trying to secure an outcome to feel complete. You are no longer holding your identity in someone else's reaction. You are present, observing, listening, noticing what is real as it unfolds. And that is where clarity begins to emerge, not from overthinking, not from prediction, not from emotional urgency, but from presence, from seeing what is actually there without forcing it into something else. And when someone speaks from genuine honesty, there is a steadiness to it that does not need explanation. It is felt before it is analyzed. It is recognized before it is understood. And in that recognition, something within you already knows how to respond.